CTV's W5.
Have any of you been interviewed by the RCMP?
No.
The deepening mystery behind a failed smuggling attempt.
I want the crew to know that we have been involved in their case from day one.
This is a conspiracy to import a massive amount of cocaine in this country.
There has to be a message given. There has to be a price to be paid.
And
on paper, they're considered like a chair, like furniture.
what happens to the family pet when we go our separate ways?
You paid for it, my name is there, but let's make sure that this is how it's gonna be.
I've even heard of stories where the spouse getting the animal euthanized out of spite.
I have to do this for my dog. Like, I gotta get my dog back.
Here is Avery Haynes.
Welcome to W5. A Canadian airline crew caught in a massive international drug scandal says they were abandoned during 8 months of detention in the Dominican Republic, and that they have been abandoned now that they're finally home. In a follow-up to our first documentary, we investigate why the Canadian government has been so silent and what the RCMP knew and when. January 30th, 2023. Pivot Airlines Flight 1077 taxis on the runway in Santo Domingo. Destination, Toronto.
Okay, we got 105 going back home, so yeah, it just happened.
The 50-seat jet is finally allowed to leave the Dominican Republic, almost 10 months after what was supposed to be a routine charter.
Hi guys, this is over.
But our investigation is not over, not by a long shot. Here's how it all began. April 5th, 2022.
Agencias de inteligencia incautaron 200 paquetes, presumiblemente cocaína.
Dominican drug enforcement officers announced the discovery of more than 200 kilos of cocaine inside the Pivot Airlines jet. The drugs were found and reported by the flight crew.
We really averted an air disaster. There is no doubt in my mind. I think that had we got airborne or attempted to get airborne, we would have been in trouble.
In trouble because the 8 cocaine-filled duffel bags were stashed in the avionics bay, which could have interfered with the plane's computer systems. Pilot Rob DiVinanzo thought he and his crew would be hailed as heroes. Instead, they and the 7 passengers were hauled off to this notorious jail. They were suspected of being international drug smugglers. Flight attendant Alex Rozov told us about the terrible conditions.
People were breaking into tears. No window, constant heat, humidity.
The crew was released from prison after 9 days and publicly begged the Prime Minister to get them home.
Mr. Prime Minister, we need your help. We did our job by reporting these drugs. Now we need you to do yours.
But they languished on the tropical island under virtual house arrest for 8 months, under 24-hour armed guard. They were shuffled from safe house to safe house, living in fear of retribution for disrupting a massive cocaine shipment. Despite repeated court appearances, the crew was never questioned by Dominican authorities. And they were never charged. Neither were the 7 passengers, most of whom avoided or were outright hostile towards our cameras. We were in the Dominican on November 10th when the case was suddenly, without explanation, dropped.
Shock and happiness and bewilderment and just thrilled, just absolutely thrilled. There's nothing else to say.
The Canadians were free to go home. Most of the passengers returned to their hometown of Edmonton, Alberta. We documented the crew's return to Toronto just before Christmas 2022.
I love this guy so much. It's so much.
That is the
Our new investigation has taken us from the south to a city known as the gateway to the north, Edmonton, Alberta. We went searching for answers about who might be behind getting those drugs on that plane, following leads that led us from hotels to boxing gyms.
What's your name?
It's Avery.
Here's what producer Eric Cito and I have uncovered. An Edmonton man has been on the police radar for years as a suspected international drug trafficker. W5 has obtained these provincial threat assessments, which we have redacted. These are internal police intelligence files created every year to document potential high-level criminal threats.
All right, so our guy made the threat assessment list in 2017. They say that he's believed to be involved in moving large quantities of drugs. He's believed to be able to successfully control his drug trafficking network with little detection.
2018 threat assessment. He's in it again. High-level involvement in drug trafficking. So 2 years in a row, he's been on this list.
And we know that he's been on it actually 3 times in the last decade.
Yeah.
And no charges.
None.
We know he lives in an upscale Edmonton home that someone has blurred on Google Street View. He doesn't appear to exist on social media. He has never been charged. And this man, who we're calling Ahmed, says that same person was behind organizing the cocaine shipment from the DR to Canada.
Is he low level, medium level, high level?
He is the highest level.
He's a coke kingpin.
Yes.
We're protecting his identity for his safety, and we can't divulge his profession, but have verified that Ahmed would have access to this information. He claims the man was searching out investors in Edmonton before the planned drug run.
When did you find out about this attempt to smuggle all these drugs from the Dominican Republic into Canada?
Weeks before.
There were so many investors that this was an open secret?
It's not that open of a secret.
It's an open secret within a very small group of people?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you know how many people were potential investors in this?
At least 5.
So who is the suspected organizer? Well, we can't tell you his name. Our lawyers say it's too risky legally. He's never been charged with drug trafficking. And here's a twist. We know the man has a close personal connection to Rahul Nanda, the lawyer for the passengers. When we interviewed Nanda in the Dominican Republic, he didn't answer even basic questions. Who paid his legal fees? Why were the passengers in the DR? And who organized the trip?
I didn't ask those questions.
We have requested comment from Rahul Nanda about his connection to the suspected organizer of the drug smuggling venture. He did not respond to our requests. It's not surprising that people in the Edmonton underworld knew about that load before the headline-grabbing bust. But this is shocking. We have discovered that the RCMP was aware of a plan to smuggle drugs from the Dominican Republic, and we have compelling evidence that they even had some of the passengers on their radar.
That raises just so many questions, and I would hope that's not the case, but if it is, there's some people in the RCMP have some explaining to do.
Gary Clement is a former undercover RCMP investigator. He's also an expert on financial crimes and transnational crime syndicates. He has no direct knowledge of this case, but pored over our research, including this. Through internal police emails and a confidential police source, we know the RCMP was seeking intel about a scheme to import hundreds of kilos of cocaine from the Dominican Republic. They specifically named 2 passengers with extensive ties to Alberta's drug trade, Sheldon Poirier and Sean Kosianich. The timing is critical. Remember, the drugs were discovered by the Pivot crew on April 5th. We know that the RCMP was making inquiries weeks before that. What reasons could you see for the RCMP to reach out to other police agencies to say, look, we're looking at this
potential plan to bring in hundreds of kilos of drugs from the DR to Toronto?
Rationale in my mind would be that they're seeking, obviously, assistance, and any background information can be provided. I find it surprising that they wouldn't have intervened right away. Investigation or no investigation, why would you allow the crew to languish in prison?
We put specific questions to the RCMP. What did they know and when? Were they investigating some of the passengers before the Pivot bust? As with every single request for information over the past 4 months, they responded with the same statement, word for word. The RCMP does not confirm, deny, or release information pertaining to active investigations. And so we emailed outgoing RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki directly, outlining what we've uncovered. In the response, a stunning admission, one they have never before made, that the RCMP was aware of a possible drug shipment coming in from the Dominican Republic.
Coming up,
We have not been interviewed by anybody.
what did authorities know and when?
Should we trust these authorities now?
When W5 continues.
Hey, BK.
They have been colleagues in the air,
Good to see you. How you doing?
cellmates in the Dominican Republic, and forced roommates during their 8-month detention on the tropical island.
Good to see you.
Pilot Rob DiVincenzo is getting together with his crew members for the first time since coming home. Co-pilot Atif Safdar, mechanic BK Dubé, and flight attendant Alex Rosa. Flight attendant Christina Corello is not here. She wants her privacy. The Pivot Airlines crew members are about to learn what we've uncovered about the RCMP.
We have information that the RCMP knew about a load that was going to be brought in of hundreds of kilos of cocaine from the Dominican Republic to Toronto, specifically mentioning 2 of the passengers who were on the plane.
Why didn't
Weeks before it was found in your avionics bay.
Wow. Why didn't you inform?
That is so
It's like-
disturbing. So shocking to...
It's terrible.
I'm shocked, literally. Should we trust these authorities now as a crew member? I don't trust that if that is true.
For months, the RCMP has refused to comment, but finally, after reaching out directly to RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki, we were sent this. In February of 2022, the RCMP learned of a possible drug shipment arriving by air from the Dominican Republic to Toronto. Upon landing in Toronto, the plane was intercepted and searched. However, no drugs were located. The Mounties refused to say what plane was intercepted, but we know that a fake company, Trust Capital, chartered a flight to the DR in February. Pivot Airlines says categorically that plane was not searched by the RCMP. Trust Capital also chartered the ill-fated flight in April, where the crew discovered and reported drugs in the avionics bay. The RCMP claims it had no prior knowledge that there would be an attempt to smuggle drugs on the April flight. It's not clear where their investigation stands now, but the crew might have valuable information.
Have any of you been interviewed by the RCMP?
No, not
Have
at all.
any of you been interviewed by Transport Canada?
No.
Nobody contacted us.
No one from the Canadian government has contacted you at all?
Since April 5th, we have not been interviewed by anybody. Dominican or Canadian.
In our first investigation, cocaine cargo, we exposed 4 of the passengers as having shady pasts involving drugs. Trafficking, possession for the purpose of trafficking. Sheldon Poirier, with a drug conviction in 2020, was listed by the fake company Trust Capital as an employee. We also traced payments for both flights to a numbered company,
Avery Haynes from W5.
whose director is a small-time Edmonton real estate consultant, Vic Mander. It's not clear if any of the passengers have been questioned by the RCMP. We have heard through Vic Mander's inner circle that he has not been interviewed.
What surprised me is there wasn't a number of RCMP investigators jumping all over this. This is not a complicated case.
Gary Clement is a former undercover RCMP investigator. He's also an expert on financial crimes and transnational crime syndicates.
You did a little investigation of our investigation.
Yes, that's right. I could write a production order, not 100% with what you've uncovered, but pretty close.
You're saying that you could get a production order, a search warrant, based on the information that we have uncovered?
We know that law enforcement has a lot more intelligence than you do. So combine that with what you've got, and I think there's more than sufficient grounds to start getting production orders and search warrants.
When you look at this case, given your background, given your knowledge, what potential crimes have been committed or what potential crimes could be investigated?
This is a conspiracy to import a massive amount of cocaine in this country. That may lead to then money laundering and a charge of possession of proceeds of crime. The longer you let it go, the more difficult it's going to become.
There has been silence in Ottawa about the RCMP's handling of this case. Silence, too, about a promised investigation by the Transport Minister into the crew's detention in the DR.
Senator Wells, you have time for one
In
more.
fact, one of the few politicians who has even raised the issue is Senator David Wells in February 2023.
Senator Gold, in the first week of November, Minister Algabra's office committed to a full investigation. When will the public see the terms of reference for this investigation? Can we assume that the review or the investigation will be independent of the department and the government? Senator Gold.
I'll have to make inquiries and report back to the chamber.
The government of Canada should appoint a body that should independently serve to find the answers of this thing and bring justice to light.
Just move on with your lives, you know? That's what they want us
That's
to do.
what I feel the expectation
Just
is,
move on,
right?
Just forget
Yeah.
it. Just,
And
you know,
this
8
is-
months you experience. It's experience in the Caribbean.
I've gone through enough in the last 8, 9, 10 months that that's not going to happen. I'm not going away. I'm going to fight until we find out why this happened, who did it. I'm not going away.
Transport Minister Omar Algabra has repeatedly refused our request for an interview. And so we caught up with him at a media event in Mississauga, Ontario.
This crew feels abandoned. They feel as though they were abandoned by the Canadian government when they were in the DR, and the silence of your government is continuing their abandonment now.
Look, first of all, I can't imagine what it was like for them to have gone through this ordeal, and I understand the frustration that they feel.
But you can alleviate some of that frustration by giving them a sense of the scope of your investigation.
Yeah. We've been asking the Dominican Republic authorities, first, to protect the rights of Canadians.
Isn't it time to stop asking and start demanding?
We are demanding. We are demanding.
How's that working so far?
So we will continue to advocate and put pressure on the Dominican Republic government.
Does this fly in the face when we see the Open Skies Agreement that was just reached? What kind of a message should the crew take from that?
I want the crew to know that we have been involved in their case from day one.
You'll notice the minister skipped over the question about the Open Skies Agreement. But while he claims they are demanding answers, Canada, just days earlier, reached an historic deal with the Dominican Republic to make it easier to fly between the two countries. It's an agreement that was reached despite concerns of corruption at the airport in Punta Cana. For instance, we know that someone tampered with this airport security video.
And there it skipped to 409.
Okay, wait, so it went from 326 to 409.
Yeah, it's crazy.
43 minutes were edited out the night the drugs were put on the plane.
So there we see the truck going by.
This official airport truck transported the duffel bags of drugs to the Pivot plane. Dominican authorities claim they are still investigating.
Welcome to the world of diplomacy.
John Graddick is an aviation expert at McGill University. He points to the deep economic relationship between Canada and the DR. 1 million Canadians travel to the tropical island every year as a factor in why, at least publicly, Canada has been so silent on the crew detention.
Do you think there should be sanctions?
I think so. There has to be a message given. There has to be a price to be paid. And it's up to the Canadian government to decide what that punitive action should be.
Absolute silence. Till today, it still bothers me.
They don't want to investigate, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to give answers.
But there has been a development with one of the key players in this ordeal, passenger Sheldon Poirier.
He's back in jail.
What?
Unbelievable.
What? Really?
Sheldon Poirier is back in jail. Nothing to do with your case.
W5 has learned about a month and a half after being released from the Dominican Republic, passengers Sheldon Poirier and Hadar Yonain were at this Edmonton hotel with a passenger from the first Pivot flight, Jordan Castor. An early morning fight broke out in this parking lot, and police were called.
Police are saying that Poirier attempted to access a firearm from his waistband and that it was a 9mm loaded handgun. And our sources said he was tased, right?
3 times.
These are almost all weapons charges against Poirier.
10 charges, 9 of them weapons related. 1 for obstructing a peace officer.
And Sheldon's lawyer is Rahul Nanda, the lawyer we have identified as having a personal connection to the suspected organizer of the cocaine shipment.
You've got that, that's good.
The crew still hasn't made final decisions about what's next for them.
19 degrees, right?
But pilot Rob is back in the simulator alongside his co-pilot, Atif. They are recertifying the skills they lost during 8 months of detention.
Alt cap.
But for Rob, moving on is impossible without someone being held to account.
Who do you think owes you an answer?
First and foremost, the Canadian government, because I want to know why they let us stay there for 8 months. And secondly, I want to know from law enforcement, what did you know? The public needs to know, because if you can put an international airline crew's lives in danger, you're going to do that to any member of society.
Former RCMP investigator Gary Clement is writing a book calling for changes to the RCMP. It's called Undercover, and he's adding a new chapter now to include details on how the Mounties handled the case of the Pivot Airlines crew. If you missed our first investigation, you can find it on W5's official YouTube channel.